Good morning. So I've been thinking about my watch collection, about the watch collecting hobby, and I've come up with 5 ideas or paths to increase or improve my engagement in the watch hobby. So let me have my cereal before it gets soggy, and stay tuned to hear my 5 ideas. Hello, welcome to another episode of Adventures with Time. I'm your host, Bob, and on this channel, I talk about my experiences in watch collecting. Well, it's a somewhat cloudy day, very windy, and about 40 degrees, so I decided to take a drive out to Pennsylvania, to the casino, try my luck. And on my way, I thought I'd talk to you about my latest thoughts on my watch collection. More appropriately, my engagement in the watch hobby. I recently returned from a trip to Florida, and on my flight back from that trip, I was thinking about my experiences in this hobby of collecting watches. And after 2.5 years of collecting, I still consider myself a beginner. Actually, beginner is probably not the right term. I would say novice. And what I mean by that is there's still a lot of learning about this hobby that I need to do. It's beyond just collecting watches. Now, if you've been watching some of my other videos, you know that I feel that I've gotten into a nice collecting strategy that really consists of 2 pieces. One is acquiring, or I'd say more trying different affordable watches to experience different styles, different complications, different color tones, different feel of watches. And I think affordable watches and micro brands are a good avenue for that. And the other part of my collection has to do with luxury watches, finding out and acquiring some luxury watches. But as I said, the watch hobby to me is more than just collecting watches. And I want to take my engagement or my involvement in the watch hobby to the next level. So I've come up with 5 ways or paths that I can increase my engagement and enjoyment in the watch hobby. Maybe these will resonate with you. Maybe you have some other ideas or suggestions for me. Let's see how it goes. Certainly provide your thoughts in the comments below. So first of all, and I've said this before in other videos, is learning about movements. Now, I know the basics about movements, the major movement makers, the major parts and importance of movement components. And as I've been collecting watches with different movements, I've been trying to compare the performance of these movements. But there's much more about movements than just my timing them every day and seeing how they perform. And a couple of specifics that I want to dive more into is, first, understanding in-house movements. Some of the major brands who build their own movements, design their own movements, I want to understand how they've evolved, what they currently have, and how they differ from the non-in-house movements. Specifically, what I would say is third-party movements, those who make movements and sell them to other watchmakers. The other area that I'd really like to dig into is understanding more about the components, how they actually operate. So an example of that would be the spring balance or the balance wheel. You know, I know there's a spring, I know it moves back and forth, but even just looking at a balance wheel spring, there are parts to that I really don't understand. How they connect to the wheel itself, the materials they're constructed of, how magnetic forces can affect them. So I want to read up more about that. The second area of knowledge that I want to gain relates to the first. It's being able to work on watches. Anything from just changing a movement out to actually working on a movement or modding a watch by changing handsets or the dial or the crown. And I'm about to step into that realm in one of my upcoming videos having to do with my Seiko Samurai. So look out for that video. And I feel that the more experience I have on working on watches, the better equipped I will be to evaluate the quality of a watch or even the value based on the price. So that's one of my next steps. A third area that I want to delve into is vintage watches. And I know this is a deep hole to dig, but I'd like to be able to appreciate vintage watches. And at this point, I can't even appreciate when people talk about major watches or even minor watches made before 2000. I just don't understand the history, the evolution that some of these watches have gone through to be able to appreciate and understand what models were good, what models were bad, how to even evaluate the cost or the price of one of those watches, or how to know what to expect as to condition to evaluate one of those watches. Right now I've been buying brand new watches, so that sort of sets a bar for me of what I want to see in watches, but that's not realistic in vintage watches. And if I'm going to acquire some vintage watches, I need to know how to tell if they're original components, if the watch is in good working condition. So there's a lot to learn here for me, and I'm going to take my time in getting into this, try to expand my knowledge through some reading, maybe talking to some experienced people, and dipping slowly into this area. I'm sure I'll make some mistakes, and I want to minimize those mistakes or the cost of those mistakes. And the fourth area in which I want to expand my knowledge is the history and evolution of some major watch brands. You may have seen my series on my quest or search for my first mid-tier luxury watch, where I ended up with the Tudor Black Bay 58. Well, in doing that, I visited a lot of brand boutiques, everything from Tudor to TAG to IWC to Grand Seiko, and I learned a lot in doing that. But there is a lot more to learn. So I want to maybe pick one or two of the major brands like Rolex or Omega and start digging into not only their current collection offerings, but their history, how they started, what long-running lines they have in the models that existed over that time. An example of how I'm going to do that is I just acquired the book on the Omega Speedmaster, the latest edition of the book called Moonwatch Only. Boy, that's a thick book with a lot of information, a lot of pictures. But I think through doing that, not only with Omega, as I said, but with Rolex or some of the other brands, Patek would be another one to really enjoy. But you learn about how they've designed their watches, how the actual business of watchmaking has changed for them, how they do their both market and technology research. So I think that's a real interesting area that I want to get into. And these four, although individually interesting, collectively help me with the fifth area that I want to become better at. And I guess that is feeling more comfortable in engaging with other watch collectors, other hobbyists, most of whom probably have a better understanding and knowledge of watches than I do. Up till now, most of my interactions have been mostly through comments on videos that I've produced or that I've watched from other creators. And that's quite limiting. I'd like to be able to converse with other collectors that I meet at watch shows or meetup events or other venues, and perhaps have a long-term discussion with them about our shared interests and talk about different aspects of the hobby and the watch industry and brands so that we can learn from each other. I'd be interested if any of you had this sort of hesitation when you first started collecting or learning about watches and engaging with others. It's not that I have some fear of talking or engaging with other people. It's more that I want it to be a mutually beneficial discussion. I want to be able to learn from others and have them learn from me and share our different thoughts. So I guess I could consider that those 5 steps are my plan for the next year to increase my activities, knowledge, involvement, and appreciation of the watch hobby. And this is above and beyond the collecting and acquiring of new watches. And again, I'd really like to hear from you as to your thoughts on these 5 areas of improving engagement in the watch hobby. Do you have others? Do you have advice for me on specific things I should do? So leave your comments below. And thanks for watching and subscribing, or subscribe if you haven't. And follow me on Instagram, where I post pictures of various watches. And I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks. Better get some gas before I'm stuck here on the road. Let's see, I can get off here. Boy, there's certainly a lot of 18-wheeler trucks out here today. And with this high wind, they just squirm around like the end of a fire hose. It's like the sun is making a grander appearance. Nice.